Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. And today I want to talk about a book that I read, one that has a spooky theme because we are in October, of course, and one that I read as a buddy read with my friend Cassie, who had some interesting insight into the way this book was written, so I might share a little bit of that later. But it is a book about evil carnivals and evil malevolent forces. I am referring to Something Wicked This Way Comes, an interesting title, by Ray Bradbury, which was published in 1962. For those who don't know, Ray Bradbury was a fairly well-known author. I have a feeling a lot of people might have heard his name before. He wrote predominantly in the science fiction genre. You see that a little bit here, although this is really more horror than it is science fiction. But, you know, what even is science fiction? It's a very wide genre. But he's mostly known for Fahrenheit 451, which is a book that I have read and I very much enjoyed, as well as The Martian Chronicles and a few other books that I haven't read, but would be very interested in checking out. Ray Bradbury has just become a very well-known name because people have, dissected his works and noted that he is somewhat of an interesting futurist or just has interesting commentary about the nature of humanity. He, like Fahrenheit 451, is about the dangers of book burning and fascist totalitarian states. Although it is about that, Ray Bradbury, he ended up saying that the book was about something else completely different, which, doesn't really make sense to me. It suggests that he's not even aware of what he was writing, but that's another topic for another day, kind of in line with the idea of death of author, which I subscribe to. But again, that's a topic for another day. And so without further ado, let's talk about this interesting book. I will do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So Something Wicked This Way Comes focuses on the two main protagonists, Will Holloway and his best friend, Jim Nightshade. They are young teenage friends in a small town. Not much is going on, but they frequently compete over things to see who is the best, although they don't let their competition get in the way of their friendship. At the start of the story, they hear rumors of a mysterious carnival, which is especially weird because most of the carnivals stop coming to town in August, and it is October, so it doesn't quite make sense to them. At the same time, Will's father, Charles, begins acting strangely. It's largely hinted and even said straight up throughout the story that his dad is ashamed of being so old because he can't hang out with Will and do the things that young fathers typically do, and so he's just behaving strangely throughout most of this story. And one night at 3 a.m. a carnival shows up, and Will and Jim are able to witness it and check it out a little bit. They see a mysterious maze that is kind of creepy in the way that it's structured, and they even see the main carnival heads, Mr. Cougar and Mr. Dark. They get on a carousel, and when they get off, after it spins around a bunch of times, they are much younger. And the boys realize that this circus, this carnival, is very peculiar and even dangerous. And so they run away from Mr. Cougar and Dark. And later on, Jim wants to go back to the carnival, but him and Will get into a fight, which is witnessed by Mr. Cougar, and they eventually follow him back to the carnival, where Jim tries to get on the carousel with Mr. Cougar, but Will stops him. But Mr. Cougar still gets on, and Will accidentally kind of breaks the carousel a little bit, and it causes it to spin faster and faster, to the point where Mr. Cougar is incredibly elderly, like 150 or 200 years old, which worries the boys and scares them, and so they call the police. But the freaks of the freak show manage to proclaim or lie and claim that Mr. Cougar is actually Electrico, one of the freaks of the freak show, and so the police don't really do anything about it. But the freaks and Mr. Dark both want to maintain the illusion of the carnival, and so they send the Dust Witch after them, which is like a magical witch who is capable of doing dangerous things. But they manage to outsmart the Dust Witch, and she goes back to the carnival. They then encounter one of their neighbors, Miss Foley, who's actually been de-aged and also blinded by the carousel, and she cries about it, and the boys find her, and they figure out that the carousel must be working again. And so they set about trying to get away from Mr. Dark and the carnival people, even though the carnival is doing a parade looking for them. And they manage to hide out and get their father not to talk about them, because his father, they're Charles sees them, and they don't want the parade or the Mr. Dark to find them, because he might try to kill them. And so Mr. Dark knows that Charles is hiding the kid, so he tries to intimidate him the best he can. But Charles is a very noble man and resists the intimidation tactics. The three of them, Charles, Will, and Jem, all go to the library, where they find out that the carnival is actually centuries old, and the carnival actually ensnares pretty much anyone to come and basically sell their soul in exchange for immortality. And some of the people are even captured and made freaks in the freak show, essentially slaves of the carnival. And Mr. Dark and Mr. Cougar have been made pretty much immortal and also unbearably evil as a result. And Mr. Dark and the freak show show up at the library around this time and manage to mesmerize the boys and almost kill Charles in the process, before he manages to defeat the Dust Witch with happiness, essentially laughing, which is pretty cheesy, but also in line with the overall message of the story. Charles manages to get back to the carnival and defeats a number of the freaks. Others manage to leave and try to escape. Charles finds Will mesmerized in the maze, and the maze tries to make him insecure about his old age, but Charles manages to defeat it, and he saves Will, and then Will and Charles manage to fully defeat Mr. Cougar and Mr. Dark. Mr. Dark is turned into a child, and Charles essentially kills him with happiness and kindness, which is incredibly dark when you think about it, because he is in the form of a child at that point. And unfortunately, Jem is rendered unconscious and almost dead at this point, but Will and Charles manage to save him, and all is well at the end of the story. In terms of analysis, Ray Bradbury provides us with a little bit to think about here. One sort of overall underlying theme or sort of atmosphere of this story is the sinister nature of the carnival. The boys can sense the evil presence of the carnival even before it even arrives. There's omens of the carnival's beckoning or arrival that the boys sense, and they feel uneasy. Maybe that's why they feel uneasy. I love Bradbury's writing here and how he's able to sell the carnival as evil before it even arrives. Like the boys arrive at the carnival, and they don't even arrive. Like they hear the carnival arriving, and it beckons them towards it, and it's like they can feel it as though it's an animal praying in the darkness, which is very creepy. But already you're kind of preliminary prompted or something like that into sensing that the carnival is strange and not all quite right. And even before that, a lightning rod salesman shows up and tells the boys that a storm is coming. Again, Bradbury kind of not doing foreshadowing, but hinting along the way that something wicked this way comes, which is the title of the story. And even like it's based on a full Shakespeare quote, like, by the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes, hinting that the carnival is a very dangerous and scary kind of place to be. You see this even further, the sinister nature of the carnival, with the cursed maze, which forces you to see things you don't want to see, or the carousel, which de-ages you at the cost of your mental health, at the cost of like your soul. And the dust witch, who frequently leaves the carnival in order to pursue people for the sake of the carnival, of the freak show, in order to essentially get slaves for the carnival. So every aspect of this carnival, of this large circus, is dangerous and very sinister, leaving you with a very terrified feeling about everything. And the carnival steals the souls of the wayward. It doesn't matter if you're good or bad. If you make your way to the carnival, you're doing it for a specific reason. Whether you're drawn to the distracting nature of the carnival, or you just sense there's evil and you want to be right alongside it, it's going to end up stealing your soul. And Charles actually makes a really good point about this in his story. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Need, want, desire, we burn those in our fluids, oxidize those in our souls, which jet streams out lips, nostrils, eyes, ears, broadcast from antenna fingers. Long or short wave, God only knows, but the freak masters perceive itches and come crab clustering to scratch. It's traveled a long way on an easy map, with people handy by every crossroad to lend it lustful pints of agony to power it on. So maybe the carnival survives, living off the poison of the sins we do each other, and the ferment of our most terrible regrets. Which is some really great writing, some really good lines from Ray Bradbury, and especially in the second half of this book, where Charles says, like, it feeds off the souls, it feeds off the sins of those who are wayward, who wander into the carnival. And then, like, at another point he says, it doesn't matter if you're good or bad, the carnival will take your soul regardless. So it doesn't really matter like whether you're good or bad. What matters is that you made your way there, you made a mistake, and now you're stuck with being feasted upon by these demons, by these sinister circus folk. And another unexpected theme, but one that pops up here for some inexplicable but interesting reason, is the fear of death and the fear of aging. One that I did not expect to find in this horror story, but Bradbury, to Bradbury's credit, manages to write it into the book pretty effectively. Bradbury's characters in this story, Charles, Will, Jim, many others, are initially resistant to growing old. Will and Jim are happy being young and don't really want to get older. Jim kind of feels like he wants to get older, but ultimately I think he's happy staying the same age. Charles is ashamed of growing older, of being an older dad when all the other dads are young and can do things with their children. And Mr. Cougar and Mr. Dark and many of the circus folk, they pined for immortality, and they regularly go about going to different towns and stealing souls so that they can remain young forever. So the ultimate thing piloting much of the story is the idea of wanting to stay young forever, and especially with Charles, whose entire arc revolves around him not wanting to get older, of being ashamed and trying to stay away from Will initially because he's afraid that if Will realizes that he's old, he won't want to hang out with him as much anymore. But there's a slow turn towards acceptance with Will, or not Will, but with Charles, where he's slowly more okay with the idea of being an older father, of just growing old in general. And much of it starts with his realization of what happens with the carousel, because it grants immortality, and you would think that's often, a benefit of being able to live forever, although many books rightfully point out the flaws of growing old. But the curse of immortality is mentioned in this story. The idea that if you were to use the, if you were 50 years old and you were to use the carousel and become 15 again, you would still mentally be 50 years old. You'd still have all those memories, and mentally you'd be slowly going crazy because you'd be living forever. And that'd be too much stuff worth remembering and too many people who died. And then the reverse is if you're 15 years old and you rapidly age yourself to 35, like changing your age, like Jim kind of wants to do, like you'd still be a 35-year-old with the mindset of a 15-year-old. You wouldn't be mature enough and you couldn't really relate to any of your peers. So the curse of immortality is such that like you physically you stay younger, but your mind ages regardless, and it might drive you insane, or it just might make you an ill fit among your peers. So clearly like immortality doesn't work out, and pining to be younger, like it doesn't really help, and it just exacerbates maybe your inability to connect with others. And the cure to this, the thing that saves the day, is Charles accepting that he's going to grow old, that it's okay, because when he's in the maze forces him to see that he's old. Like he looks at his reflection and he sees a hideous old man, and Will and Charles both have to fight to say, this is okay. It's okay for me to be older, vastly older than my son. As long as I love him, that's all that matters. And I think that's a really good message to be sending out there, that it's okay to age. And the way that Bradbury does it very well fits in this overall narrative of this immortality granting carnival, that feast on souls. Another element of the story that I really love is the library scene, where we learn more about the carnival, and then the freaks burst in, and Mr. Dark pretty much intimidates Charles and threatens to kill the kids. I really like it and how it's written. It's very compelling. But I ultimately, related to that, I also really love the depiction of Mr. Dark, how he's just this no-nonsense, threatening sort of specter. We don't really know what he is. Is he some sort of demon? Is he just a human who's able to live forever? Is he just a malevolent force? It could be anything, really. But the depiction of Mr. Dark is so fun. Like he's a fun villain that really terrifies you in a number of ways. I particularly like where he's talking to Charles in the library, and he's like, I could just kill you here, right? Like I could just end your life, or I could have someone end your life, and I wouldn't think anything of it. Like it's a very like callous and mean and very casual way to be evil. And I really like how Bradbury wrote it. He wrote one of the more memorable villains I've encountered in quite some time. So I do have to give him credit for that. Of course, there's a number of problems with the writing, I feel. It is hard to follow in the first half because it's at a breakneck speed, like he's rushing to get somewhere, and then it slows down in the second half and is much easier to follow and definitely a lot more fun to read. The other problem, and I wouldn't say it's a giant problem, but the writing feels like it's written in the form of a carnival barker just shouting things at you. The way characters speak, the way the paragraphs are written. One problem is that Ray Bradbury in particular, he writes a lot of run-on sentences. And so it feels like this was written by a carnival barker who's just shouting this story at you, which is kind of weird, very fitting, but I don't know if it completely lands. And then my friend Cassie, like she likes the writing. She feels that it's very unusual. And she wrote that it doesn't really feel like this is how characters are speaking, but rather it's an impression of the characters themselves, which doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to me, but it also kind of does. It's something that you have to witness for yourself, because it's like he's trying to imitate how children speak, how carnival people speak, how fathers speak. And it comes off very weird, but it also kind of works. But ultimately, it can make it very difficult to get into this story because of those things. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. A very fun book to read, even if the first half, doesn't quite land. The second half is enough for the price of admission. The library scene is worth the price of admission in my opinion. It does feel kind of cheesy at times, given that it focuses so much on the power of love and good over evil, but I'm willing to forgive Ray Bradbury for his quality writing here. Now, do I recommend this to you out there? I would say ultimately yes. I feel much better for having read this story. Like I feel like it's good that I found this or that I read this versus not having read it. And it's a wonderful addition to the Bradbury canon of books. And it does make me want to seek out more of his writing. But I can understand how some people wouldn't be drawn to it. So if you want a good spooky story or you're interested in checking out more Bradbury, this might be the story for you. Anyways, if you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Something Wicked This Way Comes. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book or the author if they don't already know who Ray Bradbury is. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and immortal travels. Farewell.